The celebration bells rang across every ship in the Galactic Federation fleet. After 23 years of bloody war, they had finally won. The last human was in chains. Marcus Kane sat quietly in the transport ship's holding cell, his hands bound with energy shackles that glowed blue in the dim light. The alien guards kept their distance even though he was locked behind 3 layers of force fields. They had heard the stories. Every soldier in the galaxy had heard the stories about what humans could do. Commander Bell of the Unified World stood outside Kane's cell, watching him through the energy barrier. She was tall and thin, with pale green skin and large black eyes that never blinked. Her people were known for their calm nature and logical thinking. But when she looked at Kane, she felt something her species rarely experienced: fear. "He doesn't look like much," said Captain Ford, a young officer with blue scales covering his reptilian face. "Just another prisoner." Bell shook her head slowly. "That's what makes him dangerous. Humans never look like what they really are." Kane lifted his head and stared directly at them. His brown eyes were calm, almost bored. He had been fighting aliens for most of his adult life, and he looked tired. But there was something else in his expression, a cold intelligence that made Bell's skin crawl. "How many ships did it take to capture him?" Ford asked. 47, Bell replied. "We lost 12 of them." Ford's eyes widened. 12 ships? For one human? He wasn't alone then. He had a crew of 8 humans with him. They held off our entire attack force for 6 hours before their ship finally broke apart. Kane smiled slightly when he heard this. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who knew secrets that others didn't. The transport ship shuddered as it dropped out of hyperspace. Through the small window they could see Titan Station, a massive prison built around a dead star. It was the most secure facility in the galaxy, designed to hold the worst criminals and war prisoners. Now it would hold the last human, Admiral. Rex of the Korthic Empire was waiting for them when they docked. He was a huge creature, standing nearly 8 feet tall with thick armor plating covering his entire body. His people were warriors, bred for battle, but even they had learned to fear humans during the war. "So this is the famous Marcus Kane," Rex said, his voice deep and rumbling. "The human who destroyed 3 of our colonies. The monster who taught other humans how to turn our own weapons against us." Kane looked up at the massive admiral without any sign of fear. "Your weapons were easy to figure out. You build them too complicated. Humans keep things simple." Rex's armor plates rattled with anger. "Simple? You call what you did simple? You turned children into soldiers. You used civilians as shields. You broke every law of civilized warfare. I won battles," Kane said quietly. "That's what matters in war." General Tom of the Reptilian Council stepped forward. He was older than the others, with scars covering his green scales. He had fought humans for 15 years and survived when many others didn't. "That's exactly why you're dangerous," Tom said. "Other species fight with honor. We have rules. We try to minimize death and suffering. But humans—" He paused, studying Kane's face. "Humans fight to win, no matter what it costs." Kane was moved to a cell deep inside Titan Station. It was a small room with no windows, surrounded by energy barriers and guard stations. The walls were made of metal that could survive a nuclear blast. But Kane wasn't looking at the walls. He was watching the guards. There were 4 different species guarding him. 2 reptilians, 1 insect-like creature, and 1 that looked almost like a living rock. They all carried different weapons and wore different armor. Kane studied each, one carefully, noting how they moved, how they held their weapons, how often they checked their equipment. "Planning your escape already?" asked Dr. White, the prison's chief medical officer. She was human-looking, but with silver skin and no hair. Her people were known for their ability to read emotions. "Just looking around," Kane replied. Dr. White activated a scanner and pointed it at Kane. "Your stress levels are completely normal. Your heart rate hasn't changed since you arrived. Most prisoners are terrified when they first see this place." "I'm not most prisoners." "No, you're not." She put away the scanner. "You're the last of your kind." "How does that feel?" Kane was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft. Lonely, but Dr. White's scanner had detected something else. Kane wasn't just calm. He was planning. His brain was working constantly, processing information, calculating possibilities. Even locked in the most secure prison in the galaxy, Marcus Kane was still fighting. That night, as the station settled into its sleep cycle, Kane lay on his narrow bed and stared at the ceiling. The guards thought he was defeated. They thought capturing him meant the human threat was over. They were wrong. Humans had always been underestimated. When the aliens first found Earth, they saw a primitive species that had barely reached their own moon. They expected easy conquest. Instead, they found creatures that adapted faster than anyone thought possible. Kane remembered the early days of the war. Humans had inferior technology and smaller numbers, but they learned quickly. They studied every alien weapon they could find. They captured enemy soldiers and questioned them. They discovered that most alien species followed the same patterns, used the same tactics, thought in the same ways. And then humans began to change the rules. Where aliens saw honor in battle, humans saw opportunities. Where aliens showed mercy to defeated enemies, humans pressed their advantages. Where aliens tried to minimize civilian casualties, humans used every resource available. The galaxy had called them monsters, war criminals, savages who didn't deserve to exist among civilized species. Kane closed his eyes and smiled in the darkness. Let them think what they wanted. Let them believe they had won. The war was over, but Marcus Kane was still thinking. Still planning, still fighting, because the one thing the galaxy had never understood about humans was this: they never gave up. Even when they were alone, even when they were outnumbered, even when they were the last one left. And Marcus Kane had learned something during his years of fighting that the aliens didn't know yet. He had learned their weaknesses. All of them. Every species in the Federation had flaws that could be exploited, fears that could be used against them. Someday, that knowledge might be useful. Someday, the galaxy might need someone who understood how to fight dirty, how to break rules, how to win at any cost. But for now, Kane would wait, and watch, and remember everything, because he was human, and humans were very, very dangerous. 3 months after Marcus Kane's capture, the first distress signal came from the outer rim of the galaxy. Admiral Rex was in his command center when the message arrived. The hologram showed a terrified Korthak captain, his armor cracked and smoking. Behind him, explosions lit up the bridge of his ship. "Admiral, we need immediate backup. The enemy. They're not like anything we've ever seen. They don't negotiate, they don't retreat, they just consume everything." The transmission cut to static. Rex stared at the empty hologram projector for a long moment. In 40 years of military service, he had never heard such fear in a Korthak warrior's voice. His people were bred for battle. They didn't scare easily. "Send a scout fleet to investigate," he ordered his second-in-command. The scout fleet never came back. Within a week, 3 more star systems went silent. Long-range sensors showed something impossible. Entire planets were disappearing. Not destroyed, not conquered, but completely gone, leaving behind empty space where worlds used to be. Commander Bell arrived at Titan Station with an emergency council meeting. Representatives from all major species sat around a circular table, their faces showing the same emotion, panic. "We're calling them the Void Swarm," Bell explained, activating a holographic display. "They appear to be mechanical beings, but unlike any AI we've encountered. They don't want territory or resources in the traditional sense. They convert matter directly into more of themselves." General Tom leaned forward, his old scales creaking. "How many ships do they have?" "That's the problem, we don't know. Every time we destroy one, 10 more appear. It's like fighting a forest fire with a water gun." Dr. White, who had been studying the data, spoke up. "Their technology is completely alien, not built like anything in our databases. And they seem to have no individual consciousness. They act as one massive organism." Admiral Rex slammed his armored fist on the table. "Then we fight them like we fight any enemy. Mass our fleets, Use our superior firepower. Drive them back. We tried that, Bell said quietly. The first battle fleet we sent had 200 ships, elite forces from 6 different species. The swarm consumed them in less than an hour. The room fell silent. 200 ships was enough firepower to conquer most star systems. The idea that they could be destroyed so quickly was terrifying. What do they want? Asked Captain Ford. Everything, Bell replied. They want to consume the entire galaxy. For the next month, the Federation tried everything they could think of. Massive fleet engagements failed, defensive lines were overrun. Evacuation efforts barely stayed ahead of the advancing swarm. Traditional military tactics that had worked for thousands of years proved useless. The swarm didn't follow the rules of civilized warfare. They didn't care about their own losses. They didn't retreat when outnumbered. They didn't negotiate or communicate. They simply consumed everything in their path and moved on to the next target. General Tom found himself staring at casualty reports that made no sense. Entire fleets destroyed with minimal damage to the enemy. Planets stripped bare in hours. The Federation was losing the war so badly that some species were already discussing surrender, if the swarm even accepted surrender. That's when Dr. White made her suggestion. There is someone who might be able to help, she said during an emergency meeting. Someone who understands unconventional warfare. Admiral Rex's armor plates rattled with anger. If you're suggesting what I think you're suggesting, Marcus, Kane has fought against impossible odds before, Dr. White continued. He's the expert on warfare that breaks all the rules. He's a war criminal, Rex shouted. A monster who turned children into soldiers. And right now he might be our only chance, General Tom said quietly. The old reptilian looked tired. The swarm doesn't follow our rules. Maybe we need someone who doesn't follow rules either. The debate continued for hours. Some argued that working with Kane would be betraying everything the Federation stood for. Others pointed out that there wouldn't be a Federation left to stand for anything if the swarm wasn't stopped. Finally, Commander Bell made the decision. I'll talk to him. Kane was sitting on his bed when Bell entered his cell. He looked exactly the same as the day he arrived, calm, patient, dangerous. But there was something different in his eyes when he saw her expression. Let me guess, Kane said. Something's gone wrong and you need the human monster to fix it. Bell activated a holographic display showing the swarm's advance. Red dots marked consumed systems, slowly spreading across the galaxy like a disease. They call themselves the Void Swarm. They've destroyed 47 star systems in 6 weeks. Every fleet we send against them gets consumed. They don't negotiate, they don't retreat, they just consume everything and move on. Kane studied the display carefully. His eyes tracked the swarm's movement patterns, the timing of their attacks, the systems they chose to hit first. Interesting, he said finally. Interesting. They're destroying the galaxy. No, they're not. Kane stood up and walked closer to the hologram. They're harvesting it. Look at the pattern. They hit industrial systems first, then military bases, then civilian populations. They're not just consuming matter randomly. They're targeting specific resources. Bell felt a chill run down her spine. Kane had figured out something in minutes that Federation analysts had missed for weeks. What do you want? She asked. Kane smiled. That same cold, calculating smile that had terrified aliens across the galaxy. Full tactical command, access to all military assets, and no questions about my methods. That's impossible. The Federation Council would never. Then the Federation will be consumed, Kane said simply. Your choice. Bell stared at him for a long moment. Kane wasn't desperate or begging. He was stating facts. The swarm was winning, the Federation was losing, and he was offering a solution, at a price. Why would you help us? We destroyed your species. We hunted your people to extinction. Kane's expression became serious. Because if the swarm wins, there won't be a galaxy left to rebuild. And despite what you think of humans, we actually liked this galaxy. It was interesting. He walked back to his bed and sat down. Besides, I'm getting bored in here. And humans don't do well when we're bored. Bell left the cell with her mind racing. Kane's offer was dangerous. maybe more dangerous than the swarm itself. Giving a human tactical command of Federation forces was like handing a knife to someone who had already stabbed you. But as she looked at the latest casualty reports, she realized they might not have a choice. The swarm was consuming the galaxy, and conventional warfare wasn't working. Maybe it was time to try something unconventional. Maybe it was time to let the monster out of his cage. 3 days later, the Federation Council made their decision. Marcus Kane, the last human prisoner, would be given temporary freedom and tactical authority to fight the Void Swarm. They had no idea what they had just unleashed. Marcus Kane stood in the Federation's main war room for the first time in 3 months. The energy shackles were gone, but 6 armed guards watched his every move. Around the room, holographic displays showed the Void Swarm's continued advance. 12 more systems consumed in the past week. Admiral Rex glared at Kane from across the table. "Don't think this changes anything, human. You're still a prisoner, still a war criminal." Kane ignored him and studied the tactical displays. Fleet positions, supply lines, evacuation routes, all laid out in perfect detail. Information that would have taken him years to gather during the war was now freely available. "Your first lesson," Kane said, pointing at the largest display, "is that you're fighting the wrong war." General Tom leaned forward. "What do you mean?" "You're trying to beat them in conventional battles. Big fleets, head-to-head combat, honorable engagement." Kane shook his head. "The swarm doesn't care about honor. They don't get tired. They don't retreat. They don't fear death. Fighting them fairly is suicide." Commander Bell activated a recording of the latest battle. Federation ships fired in organized formations while swarm units swarmed around them like angry insects. "What would you do differently?" she asked. Kane smiled coldly. "Everything." The first change Kane made horrified the alien commanders. He ordered Federation fleets to abandon their traditional formations and fight in small, scattered groups. When Admiral Rex protested, Kane had him watch the results. The scattered Federation ships hit swarm units with quick attacks, then retreated, before the enemy could respond. No grand battles, no heroic last stands, just constant harassment that slowly wore down the swarm's numbers. "This is cowardice," Rex roared. "We run from every fight." "And we're winning," Kane replied, showing the casualty reports. For the first time since the war began, Federation losses were lower than swarm losses. But Kane's next order made them even more uncomfortable. "We're going to use suicide attacks," he announced during a strategy meeting. The room erupted in protests. Captain Ford stood up, his scales changing color with emotion. "That's barbaric. Civilized species don't throw away lives like that." Kane looked at him with those cold brown eyes. "The swarm does. Every single unit they have is essentially a suicide weapon. They don't value individual lives because they don't have individual lives. To beat them, we need to think like them." Dr. White, who had been monitoring Kane's psychological state, spoke up. "This violates every treaty on ethical warfare that the Federation has signed." "The swarm didn't sign your treaties," Kane said simply. The first suicide mission was led by volunteers. Pilots whose homeworlds had already been consumed. Kane equipped their ships with experimental explosives and sent them directly into the heart of a swarm formation. The explosion destroyed more enemy units than any previous attack, but the cost disturbed the Federation commanders. They had always fought to preserve life, even enemy life when possible. Kane's methods went against everything they believed in. General Tom found Kane studying star charts late one night. "How do you sleep?" the old reptilian asked. "Knowing that you sent those pilots to die?" Kane didn't look up from his charts. "The same way you'll sleep tonight, knowing that those pilots saved 3 colonies by dying." "That's different. We didn't choose to sacrifice them." "Yes, you did." Kane finally looked at Tom. "You chose to give me tactical command. Every decision I make is a decision you approved." Tom felt a chill run through his scales. Kane was right. The Federation had made him their weapon, and now they had to live with how he used that power. The next phase of Kane's strategy was even worse. He began targeting swarm command nodes, the central units that coordinated their attacks. but these nodes were usually protected by massive defensive formations. "We'll use false surrenders," Kane announced. Commander Bell stared at him. That's a war crime. You can't fake surrender to gain tactical advantage. Watch me." Kane's plan was simple and brutal. Federation ships would approach swarm formations broadcasting surrender signals. When the enemy moved to consume them, hidden weapons would activate, destroying the command nodes from within. It worked perfectly. 3 major swarm formations were crippled in a single day. But word of the false surrenders spread through the Federation fleet. Some officers refused to participate. Others questioned whether they were still the good guys if they used such tactics. Captain Ford cornered Kane after one particularly successful mission. "You're turning us into monsters, just like humans." Kane studied the young officer's face. "Good. Monsters might actually survive this war." As weeks passed, Kane's influence over the Federation military grew stronger. Officers who had never considered breaking rules of warfare now planned ambushes and trap attacks. Soldiers who had been taught to show mercy to defeated enemies now fought with ruthless efficiency. The results were undeniable. The swarm's advance had stopped. For the first time since the invasion began, Federation forces were winning battles consistently. But Admiral Rex noticed something disturbing. Kane wasn't just winning battles. He was learning everything about Federation military capabilities. Their ship designs, their communication codes, their supply routes, their defensive positions. "He's mapping our entire military structure," Rex told Bell during a private meeting. "Every tactical briefing gives him more information about our forces." Bell had noticed the same thing. Kane asked detailed questions about fleet compositions, officer training, and resource allocation. Information that would be useful for fighting the swarm but also for fighting the Federation. "Do you think he's planning something?" she asked. Rex's armor plates clicked nervously. "Humans always plan something. The question is whether we'll see it coming." Meanwhile, Kane continued transforming Federation military doctrine. He introduced concepts that had never existed in galactic warfare: total war, acceptable losses, psychological operations. Ideas that worked against the swarm but changed the nature of the Federation itself. Dr. White observed these changes with growing concern. The officers under Kane's command are becoming more aggressive, more willing to take risks, more comfortable with violence. He's not just teaching them tactics, he's teaching them to think like humans. Some Federation species began calling Kane the necessary evil, a monster they needed to defeat a greater monster. But others wondered if the cure was becoming worse than the disease. Kane seemed aware of their concerns, but he didn't care. Every day the war continued, he gathered more intelligence about Federation capabilities and weaknesses. Every order he gave taught alien officers more about human military thinking. And deep in his mind, Marcus Kane was still fighting the war that had never really ended. The war between humanity and the galaxy that had destroyed his species. The swarm was just an opportunity. A chance to position himself for what came next, because Kane had learned something during his months of freedom that the Federation didn't realize yet. They needed him more than he needed them, and that gave him power. Dangerous, growing power that he planned to use very carefully. 6 months into the war against the Void Swarm, Marcus Kane stood over a holographic map of the Centauri system. The entire system was marked in red, completely overrun by swarm forces. 20 billion civilians lived on those worlds. "We evacuate them," Admiral Rex said firmly. "Pull back our fleets and save as many lives as possible." Kane shook his head. "We destroy the system." The war room fell silent. Commander Bell stared at Kane in horror. "That's 20 billion people, innocent civilians. 20 billion people who will be converted into swarm units if we don't act," Kane replied calmly. "The swarm uses organic matter to build new ships, new weapons, new soldiers. Every person they capture makes them stronger." General Tom's old scales trembled with anger. "You're talking about genocide." "I'm talking about mathematics." Kane activated a projection showing swarm expansion rates. If they convert the Centauri population, they'll have enough resources to build a fleet that can overrun the entire inner rim. We'll lose 50 systems instead of 1. Captain Ford stepped forward. There has to be another way. We can't just murder entire populations to deny them to the enemy. Kane looked at the young officer with something that might have been pity. This is war, Ford. Real war. Not the polite battles your people are used to. Sometimes saving the galaxy means destroying parts of it. The debate continued for hours, but Kane had already made his decision. He activated emergency military protocols that gave him authority over orbital defense platforms around the Centauri system. Before anyone could stop him, he triggered the platform's self-destruct sequences. The explosions were visible from 3 star systems away. 20 billion lives ended in seconds, along with any chance of the swarm using their resources. Admiral Rex was so angry his armor plates were smoking. You monster. You're no better than the swarm. I'm worse, Kane said quietly. The swarm kills without understanding what they're doing. I know exactly what I did, and I'll do it again if necessary. But Kane's brutal strategy worked. Without the resources from Centauri, the swarm's advance slowed significantly. Federation forces, trained in Kane's ruthless tactics, began winning battles across multiple fronts. However, the victory came at a terrible cost that went beyond lost lives. Dr. White watched the changes in Federation personnel with growing alarm. Officers who had once refused to fire on retreating enemies now showed no mercy. Soldiers who had protected civilians now viewed them as potential resources or liabilities. They're becoming like him, she told Commander Bell during a private meeting. Kane isn't just teaching them tactics, he's changing their fundamental nature. Bell had noticed the same transformation. Captain Ford, once idealistic and hopeful, now spoke casually about acceptable casualty rates. Young officers, who had joined the military to protect people, now calculated how many lives they could sacrifice to achieve objectives. Maybe that's what it takes to win, Bell said, though she didn't sound convinced. Win what? If we become monsters to defeat monsters, what exactly have we saved? The answer came sooner than anyone expected. Kane's next operation was his most ambitious yet. Intelligence reports showed that the swarm was building a massive construction facility in the Outer Rim, a factory capable of producing thousands of new units per day. Kane decided to destroy it using Federation prisoners of war. Absolutely not, Rex declared when Kane presented the plan. We don't use prisoners as weapons. These prisoners volunteered, Kane replied, showing him the list. 47 Federation, soldiers who were captured by the swarm and then rescued. They want revenge. What Kane didn't mention was how he had convinced them to volunteer. Hours of psychological manipulation, playing on their trauma, their anger, their desire for purpose. After surviving swarm captivity, he had turned broken soldiers into willing weapons. The mission succeeded brilliantly. The swarm facility was completely destroyed, dealing a massive blow to their production capabilities. But when the details of the operation became known, even Kane's supporters began to question his methods. Commander Bell confronted him after reviewing the mission reports. You used torture victims as suicide bombers. These people weren't thinking clearly, they were traumatized, desperate for meaning. Kane didn't deny it. They found meaning. They saved millions of lives by destroying that facility. By throwing their own lives away. By choosing to die for something greater than themselves. Kane's voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath the words. Every human who ever lived understood that choice. Your people are just learning it now. That night, Bell made a discovery that changed everything. While reviewing supply requisitions, she found hidden patterns in Kane's orders. Weapons shipments to remote locations, communication equipment sent to abandoned sectors, food and medical supplies redirected to coordinates that matched no known Federation bases. She traced the patterns and realized the horrible truth. Kane had been building a network throughout Federation space. Not to fight the swarm, but to prepare for something else entirely. Bell called an emergency meeting with the senior command staff. Kane's been using our own supply lines to create hidden bases across the galaxy. He's not just fighting the swarm, he's positioning assets for after the war. Admiral Rex studied the evidence with growing fury. What kind of assets? Everything he needs to restart a human military force. Weapons, ships, supplies, and most importantly, people. General Tom looked confused. People? There are no other humans. Not yet, Bell said grimly. But Kane's been recruiting. Officers who've learned to fight like humans, soldiers who've adopted human tactics, species with human-compatible biology. The truth was even worse than Bell suspected. Kane hadn't just been studying Federation military capabilities. He had been identifying which aliens could be trained to think and fight like humans. His psychological profiles of Federation personnel weren't for military efficiency. They were recruitment assessments. Captain Ford, who had become one of Kane's most successful students, was horrified when he learned the truth. He's been planning this from the beginning. The whole time we thought he was helping us, he was preparing to rebuild humanity. Kane didn't deny the accusations when confronted. Did you think I was doing this out of charity? My species is extinct. My world is a graveyard. Everything I've ever cared about is gone. So you decided to betray the people who freed you? Rex demanded. I decided to ensure that humanity's ideas survive, Kane corrected. Your people will remember what I taught you. How to fight without rules. How to win at any cost. How to be dangerous when you need to be. Belle felt sick as she realized the full scope of Kane's manipulation. You never intended to just help us win the war. You planned to change us into something else entirely. Kane smiled, that cold, calculating smile. I planned to give the galaxy a gift, the knowledge of what it means to fight like a human. Whether you use that gift wisely is up to you. The Federation leadership faced an impossible choice. They needed Kane to finish the war against the Swarm, but keeping him free meant allowing him to complete whatever plan he was building, and the worst part was that Kane knew they needed him. The Swarm was still advancing, and only Kane's ruthless tactics were holding them back. They were trapped by their own desperation, forced to rely on someone who had been playing a deeper game all along. Kane had taught them to be monsters. Now they had to decide what kind of monsters they wanted to be. The final battle was coming. Deep space sensors showed the void swarm massing at the galaxy's core, building something massive around the ancient black hole that anchored their civilization. Whatever they were constructing would either end the war or end everything else. Marcus Kane stood in the Federation war room one last time, surrounded by officers who no longer trusted him, but still needed him. The evidence of his secret network lay scattered across the table. Weapons caches, hidden bases, recruitment lists of aliens who had learned to think like humans. Admiral Rex's armor was scarred from months of brutal warfare. Why? He asked. Simply. Why help us at all if you were planning to betray us? Kane studied the tactical display showing the swarm's final position. Because there's no point in rebuilding humanity if there's no galaxy left to live in. Commander Bell activated a recording from their deep space probes. The images showed something impossible. The swarm was building a massive device around the black hole, something that pulsed with energy that hurt to look at. Our scientists think it's a weapon, she said. Something that could destroy star systems from across the galaxy. General Tom, older and more tired than ever, leaned forward. How do we stop it? Kane smiled grimly. We don't stop it. We go straight to its heart and destroy it from the inside. Captain Ford studied the readings. That's suicide. The gravitational forces alone would tear apart any ship before it got close. Not any ship, Kane corrected. A ship designed for suicide. Kane's plan was typically brutal and effective. They would build a weapon unlike anything ever created, a ship powered by matter-antimatter annihilation, guided by a human brain linked directly to its navigation systems. Someone would have to pilot it manually through the swarm's defenses and into the weapon's core. Who pilots it? Bell asked, though she already knew the answer. I do, Kane said simply. The room erupted in arguments. Some officers insisted it was too dangerous to trust Kane with such a mission. Others pointed out that no one else understood both human tactics and swarm behavior well enough to succeed. Admiral Rex silenced the debate with a gesture. You expect us to believe you'll sacrifice yourself to save the galaxy? After everything you've done? Kane's expression became serious. I expect you to understand that I've already won. He activated a holographic display showing Federation military units across the galaxy. Look at your own forces. Really look at them. The display highlighted officers trained in Kane's methods, units using human tactics, entire fleets that had adopted human military doctrine. Red markers showed Kane's hidden assets, but yellow markers showed something else. Federation personnel who had learned to fight like humans without even realizing it. I didn't just train your soldiers, Kane continued. I changed your entire military culture. Every officer who learned to break rules of engagement, every captain who chose victory over honor, every general who accepted necessary casualties. Dr. White stared at the display in horror. You've infected our entire military with human thinking. I've evolved it, Kane corrected. The galaxy will never again underestimate the value of human military doctrine, because now it's your doctrine too. The truth was staggering. Kane hadn't just been building a hidden network, he had been transforming the Federation itself. Officers who had learned his methods would teach them to others. Tactics that had proven effective would become standard procedure. The ruthless efficiency of human warfare would spread throughout galactic civilization. Captain Ford, who had become one of Kane's most successful students, finally understood. You weren't trying to rebuild humanity. You were trying to make us into humans. Better, Kane said. I was making you into what humans could have become if we'd had your technology, your resources, your unity. Belle felt sick as she realized the full scope of Kane's victory. Even if we lock you up again, it's too late. The damage is done. It's not damage, Kane replied calmly. It's evolution. The galaxy is a dangerous place. You've learned that the hard way. Now you have the tools to survive it. The debate about Kane's final mission continued for days, but time was running out. The swarm's weapon was nearly complete, and Federation forces were taking massive casualties trying to slow its construction. Finally, General Tom made the decision. Kane pilots the mission, but he goes alone. Kane nodded acceptance. I wouldn't want it any other way. The ship they built for him was a marvel of desperate engineering, a fusion of Federation technology and human design philosophy. Fast, maneuverable, and carrying enough antimatter to crack a small moon. Kane named it Humanity's End. On the day of the mission, Kane stood in the launch bay surrounded by officers who had learned to fight like him. Some still hated him, but all of them respected what he had taught them. Captain Ford approached him before launch. Why are you really doing this? Kane looked at the young officer who had changed from an idealistic rookie into a hardened military commander. Because this is what humans do. We make the hard choices so others don't have to. Admiral Rex watched from the command deck as Kane's ship launched toward the galaxy's core. Do you think he'll actually complete the mission? Commander Bell studied the tactical display. He will. Because this was always his plan. The journey to the swarm's weapon took 3 days. Kane's ship fought through waves of enemy units using every trick and tactic he had ever learned. The Federation fleet followed as close as they could, providing cover fire and drawing off pursuit. As Kane approached the massive construction around the black hole, he opened a final communication channel to the Federation fleet. This is Marcus, Kane, last human in the galaxy. His voice crackled through static. I want you all to remember something. I didn't teach you to be monsters. I taught you to be survivors. The swarm's weapon was even more terrifying up close. A structure the size of a moon, channeling the black hole's energy into something that could reach across space and destroy entire star systems. Kane guided his ship into the weapon's core, past defenses that would have stopped any conventional attack. The antimatter warhead armed itself automatically as he reached the center of the construction. His final transmission reached the Federation fleet just as the weapon's energy beam began charging for its first shot. The galaxy belongs to you now, Kane said. Try not to destroy it before you figure out what to do with it. And remember, being dangerous isn't about being evil. It's about being willing to do what's necessary when everything depends on it. The explosion was visible from 1,000 light-years away. The swarm's weapon vanished in a burst of energy that consumed everything within 10 light-years of the galaxy's core. The black hole itself flickered and died, taking the swarm's central intelligence with it. Across the galaxy, swarm units simply stopped moving. Without their central coordination, they became nothing more than scattered machines, easily mopped up by Federation forces. The war was over. The galaxy was saved, but Marcus Kane's real victory wasn't the defeat of the swarm. It was the transformation of the Federation itself. Military academies began teaching courses on unconventional warfare. Officers learned that sometimes rules needed to be broken. Soldiers understood that victory sometimes required terrible choices. The galaxy had learned to fight like humans, and it would never forget that lesson. Kane was gone. But humanity's legacy lived on in every Federation officer who chose efficiency over honor, in every battle plan that prioritized victory over casualties, in every decision that put survival above principles. The last human had saved the galaxy by teaching it to be human, and that was the most dangerous gift of all.